this lecture, we will be introduced to the concept of anti-oppressive practice and how to incorporate it in our structural approach to social justice. Social justice practice demands constant reevaluation of one's position. Social justice is defined variously by social justice organizations, but its three non-negotiable tenets include the provision of equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal treatment. The Center for Economic and Social Justice adds the additional clause of personal responsibility of individuals to ensure that social institutions allow for growth. Social power can be redistributed to achieve equality and improve access to resources in an effort to reaffirm human rights. It is also essential to acknowledge and respect diversity and lived experience of individuals within these communities, since it directly affects their participation and inclusion in everyday interactions with systems and individuals. A key means to redistribute social power and realign imbalances in power is through intentional anti-oppressive practice. The term anti-oppressive encompasses the practices undertaken to resist the abuse of power in individual and structural behavior. The structural forces that marginalize particular social groups and require anti-oppressive inquiry include colonialism, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, casteism, classism, ableism, and etc. Although oppression is perceived as something that is external, the result of broad social structures, its impact can be quite personal and intimate. At the same time, anti-oppressive practice is also cognizant of how oppression impinges onto access to other fields such as healthcare, education, and housing. As an opposition of existing structural and interpersonal oppression, such practice is guided by the need to challenge inequalities at the ideological level. It is grounded in a person-centered philosophy, the ability to think the personal and the political, or to situate individual experiences of oppression in relation to wider socio-cultural patterns of ideological inequality, an egalitarian value system concerned with reducing the deleterious effects of structural inequalities upon people's lives. The practice is also grounded in a methodology focusing on both process and outcome, and also in a way of structuring relationships between individuals that aims to empower them by reducing the negative effects of social hierarchies on their interaction and the work they do together. The most important anti-oppressive principle is that of critical consciousness or reflexivity, which requires that people assess their implicit biases that affect their collection of information, and in the context of social work, the relationship with those for whom social work is undertaken. In doing the work of anti-oppression, the following questions can be useful starting points for us to ensure that we are actively addressing inequalities and centering oppressed individuals' access to just outcomes. The questions are: how are you including diverse lived experiences, ways of knowing, and expression in your work? Are you developing the tools that you need to challenge your own implicit bias? And are you addressing it actively as it arises? How are you including or centering those voices which may not be in the room but are impacted by the conversation? Where do you have power in relation to others? And how are you occupying space in relation to them? Are you using an intersectional lens to make sense of the multidimensional nature of oppression that certain groups experience? And lastly, is your work able to mobilize for systemic change or address systemic barriers? Now I will invite you to ask yourself, what are some of the other questions that you can think of while holding an anti-oppressive inquiry of your work or everyday interactions? I'll give you some time to think about it. Remember, the work of anti-oppressive practice is dynamic and shifting based on the context in which you do it, and requires an in-depth learning and critical reflection. There are no one-size-fits-all approaches to incorporating anti-oppressive practice, and it requires you to continue to center marginalized voices, listen and learn. You may not always have all the right answers, but as long as you're able to ask power-critical questions using a social justice lens, you should be on the right track. I hope that this lecture introduced you effectively to anti oppressive practice and allowed you to challenge your own ideas and practices to make them more socially just. The next lecture will help you better understand the nuances of practicing anti oppression in everyday interactions.